In the quiet hum of her penthouse office, Sarah believed she had mastered the art of living. Her name, synonymous with success in the cutthroat world of corporate finance, gleamed on every award, every magazine cover. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath her like a glittering conquest. She had built this empire from nothing, brick by painstaking brick, fueled by an ambition that left little room for anything else. Her designer suits were armor, her schedule a fortress. She had a sprawling home in the Hamptons, a sleek apartment in Manhattan, and a network of powerful friends who admired her drive, her tenacity, her sheer unyielding will. But beneath the polished veneer, a subtle tremor had begun, an almost imperceptible crack in the foundation of her perfectly constructed world. It wasn't anything she could pinpoint, just a faint echo of emptiness in the rare moments of silence, a fleeting whisper of a life unexamined. She dismissed it, of course. There was no time for introspection when deals worth millions hung in the balance, when market fluctuations demanded constant vigilance. Her phone was an extension of her hand, vibrating with news alerts, client calls, and urgent emails even as she sipped her artisanal coffee. She often joked that her sleep was merely a necessary evil, a brief pause before the next strategic maneuver. Her relationships, while numerous, were transactional, mirroring the very business she excelled at. Emotional depth felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, a distraction from the relentless pursuit of more. Yet, even as she closed another monumental deal that Tuesday, securing yet another victory, the whisper grew a little louder, a shadow stretching longer in her peripheral vision. The financial world might be her battlefield, but something deeper, something far more personal, was about to become her unexpected war. The first sign of trouble came not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, insidious shifts in the market, initially dismissed as minor corrections. Sarah, ever the strategist, had diversified, hedged, and planned for every contingency, or so she thought. But the scale of what was coming defied all her models, all her predictions. The whispers of emptiness were about to become a roaring gale, stripping away everything she had so carefully built. This wasn't just a market correction. It was a reckoning disguised as an economic downturn, a storm that would leave no stone unturned in the landscape of her meticulously managed life. The foundations she'd so confidently laid were about to crumble, revealing the fragile humanity beneath the ironclad exterior. If you've ever felt the ground shake beneath your own feet, or faced a turning point that demanded you look beyond what you thought you knew, this story is for you. We're exploring journeys of profound loss and incredible rebirth. And if that resonates, please consider subscribing and leaving a like to support these stories of hope. The financial crisis that followed wasn't just another downturn, it was an avalanche. Sarah, despite her foresight, found herself caught in its inescapable path. The market, once her playground, transformed into a predator, devouring assets, clients, and reputations with indiscriminate hunger. Her carefully constructed portfolio, diversified across what she believed were impenetrable sectors, began to bleed out. First, it was the blue-chip stocks, then the real estate investments, then the venture capital funds. Each day brought a new report, a new wave of panic, a new email detailing another significant loss. The adrenaline that once fueled her now became a constant, nauseating churn in her stomach. Sleep became a battle she rarely won, her mind racing through. It was a bitter, cold evening, the kind that seeps into your bones and rattles your very soul, mirroring the emptiness Sarah felt inside. The eviction notice had come weeks ago, a crisp white rectangle that had felt like a death sentence. Now, as the last of her meager belongings were stacked clumsily on the curb, the biting wind seemed to mock her. Her small dog, Buster, shivered beside her, his innocent eyes looking up, confused by the sudden upheaval. He was all she had left. The familiar scent of her small apartment, a place she'd called home for 15 years, was replaced by the acrid smell of exhaust fumes and urban decay. Every memory, every laugh, every tear shed. The chill of the pre-dawn air bit into Sarah's exposed skin, a harsh reminder of her new reality. The park bench, hard and unforgiving, was her bed. Her purse, clutched tight, held nothing but a few crumpled notes and a long-dead phone. Despair, A heavy blanket had settled over her, thick and suffocating. She'd spent weeks feeling the slow, agonizing unraveling of her life. The business gone, the savings vanished, the fair-weather friends disappeared like morning mist. Just moments ago, a stranger, a woman whose eyes held a wisdom Sarah couldn't fathom, had paused by her. "When you lose everything," the stranger had said, her voice a gentle murmur against the city's distant hum. "Look up." Sarah had dismissed it then, another platitude in a world that offered none. But now, as the first faint streaks of gray began to paint the eastern sky, a strange compulsion took hold. She hadn't looked up in weeks, perhaps months. Her gaze had been fixed on the ground, on the dirt, on the impossible task of putting one foot in front of the other. Defeat had a way of shrinking one's world, making the horizon invisible. Now, with a sigh that felt like it carried the weight of her entire collapsed world, Sarah slowly tilted her head back. The sky, a vast canvas of indigo fading to lavender, stretched endlessly above her. A lone, persistent star still glittered, a pinprick of defiant light against the encroaching dawn. It wasn't a sudden revelation, no thunderclap of epiphany, just a quiet observation. The world was still turning. The sun was still rising, and somewhere in that immense expanse, there was still light. The stranger's words echoed, no longer as an accusation, but as a tender invitation. What did "look up" even mean when your eyes were so heavy with unshed tears and the weight of what was lost? It meant seeing beyond the immediate, beyond the concrete and the immediate pain. It meant acknowledging a perspective larger than her own broken existence. The cold wind ruffled her hair, a reminder of her vulnerability. Yet for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah didn't flinch away from it. She just watched the sky, her mind a turbulent sea slowly starting to calm. The thought of a door opening felt impossible, almost absurd given her circumstances. But the simple act of looking up had done something. It had shifted her focus, even if only for a moment, from the gaping hole in her life to the boundless sky above. The fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but a tiny, almost imperceptible thread of something else had begun to weave itself through the fabric of her despair. It felt like a whisper of courage, a faint echo of hope she hadn't known she still possessed. This fragile shift in perspective, born from a stranger's simple command, was the first tremor of a new beginning, though she couldn't yet comprehend its magnitude. She knew she had to take another step, even if it was just to understand what that fragile hope truly meant. The first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the city's rooftops, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, a mundane yet beautiful spectacle she hadn't noticed in years. The air, still crisp, carried the scent of wet asphalt and blooming jasmine from a distant garden. Sarah shivered, but this time it wasn't just from the cold. It was a tremor of uncertainty, a feeling of being on the precipice of something unknown. The stranger's promise of a door opening by dawn seemed utterly ludicrous now that dawn was here, painting the world in hues of orange and pink. There was no physical door, no miraculous vision, just the same hard park bench, the same empty pockets, the same gnawing hunger. Her heart sank, a familiar ache. Had she allowed herself to hope for a fleeting moment, only to be crushed again? Yet, the image of that single defiant star lingered in her mind. It wasn't about a literal door. She slowly began to understand. It was about seeing differently. Her logical mind, honed by years in the corporate world, screamed for tangible proof, for a direct solution. But her spirit, starved and exhausted, yearned for something beyond logic. "Look up," the stranger had said. So she did again. This time, she wasn't just seeing the sky. She was trying to see through it, or rather into it, into something unseen. A profound loneliness washed over her, a desperate need for connection, for guidance. All her life, she had believed in self-reliance, in charting her own course. Now, she was utterly adrift, and the compass she had always trusted was broken. The weight of her past mistakes pressed down on her, the countless hours sacrificed for work, the relationships neglected, the quiet voice within that had urged her to slow down, to seek meaning beyond profit margins, ignored. She remembered snippets of her childhood, of Sunday school stories about faith, about a God who cared. Those memories felt distant, like relics from another lifetime. How could she, a woman who had so thoroughly failed at everything she touched, even begin to connect with something so vast, so pure? The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, warming her face, a different thought emerged. Maybe the door wasn't a grand entrance to a new, perfect life, but a subtle shift within herself. Maybe it was the willingness to even consider that something else existed, something beyond her control, something divine. This dawning awareness, however small, felt like a fragile first step on a very long and uncertain path. The park began to stir with the first early morning joggers and dog walkers, their familiar routines a stark contrast to Sarah's sudden, jarring displacement. Their focused gazes and purposeful strides highlighted her own aimlessness. She felt like an alien, observing a world she once belonged to, now utterly outside of it. The gnawing emptiness in her stomach intensified, demanding attention. The spiritual revelation, however profound, couldn't silence the very real, very human need for sustenance. She had a few dollars, barely enough for coffee and a cheap pastry. It was a paltry sum, but enough to offer a temporary reprieve. The immediate need, however, brought back the surge of fear. What would she do tomorrow? The day after? The question loomed, a monstrous shadow. As she slowly rose from the bench, her muscles protesting the cold night, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of defiance began to sprout. The stranger's words, "Look up," hadn't offered a solution, but they had offered a shift in perspective. And that shift, she realized, was itself a form of internal door opening. It was the door to accepting that her usual methods weren't working, that she needed a different approach. Her old self would have immediately started strategizing, calling contacts, trying to leverage what little she had left. But there was nothing left. This raw, exposed vulnerability was terrifying, yet oddly liberating. There was no mask left to wear, no reputation to uphold. She walked slowly towards a small convenience store, her senses hyper-aware of every detail. The chirping birds, the distant roar of traffic, the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting from an open doorway. Each sensation felt amplified, as if her world, once blurred by ambition and stress, was now coming into sharp, painful focus. She bought a stale croissant and a cheap coffee, the transaction feeling like a monumental effort. As she sat outside, slowly savoring the meager breakfast, a small, worn Bible lay discarded on the ground near a trash can. Someone must have dropped it. A strange impulse, one she couldn't explain, made her pick it up. It felt foreign in her hands, a relic from a past she had long dismissed. But as she flipped through its pages, the words seemed to hum with an unexpected energy, a quiet invitation that resonated with the stranger's voice and the dawning sky. This unplanned encounter with the forgotten book felt less like chance and more like a signpost on an uncharted road. The worn pages of the Bible felt surprisingly heavy in her hands, a physical anchor in her increasingly fluid reality. She ran her thumb over the delicate, almost translucent paper, her eyes scanning lines of scripture she hadn't thought about since childhood. Most of it was unfamiliar, but a few verses, perhaps from a forgotten Sunday school lesson, stirred vague memories. It wasn't intellectual curiosity that drew her in, but a raw, emotional need for something solid, something immutable in a world that had proven to be anything but. The words spoke of comfort, of strength found in weakness, of a love that transcended human understanding. They were concepts entirely alien to the cutthroat world she had inhabited, yet they resonated with a deep, silent yearning within her. She sat there, oblivious to the bustling city around her, lost in the ancient text. It wasn't about finding immediate answers to her financial woes or her homelessness. It was about finding a different kind of solace. Her mind, once a relentless factory of plans and contingencies, was now strangely quiet, receptive. The shame and self-recrimination that had been her constant companions began to recede, replaced by a quiet awe. The words spoke of a creator, a divine architect who cared for sparrows, who numbered the hairs on one's head. Could it be true? Could a power so vast and unknowable truly be concerned with her, Sarah, A broken woman sitting on a curb with nothing but a forgotten book and a stale pastry? Doubt, a familiar adversary, still whispered in the back of her mind. Years of living by her own wits had ingrained a deep skepticism, but the sheer depth of her current despair had cracked open something within her, a vulnerability that allowed for a different kind of truth to seep in. She found a passage that spoke of looking to the hills from whence cometh my help. The echo of the stranger's words, "Look up," was undeniable. It wasn't just about the physical act. It was about directing her gaze, her hope, her entire being towards a higher source. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, not of cold, but of a quiet, unfamiliar warmth. The door wasn't a physical entryway. It was an internal threshold, a shift in her spiritual perspective. And this book, found so serendipitously, felt like a gentle hand guiding her towards it, offering a path that transcended her earthly losses. The hours melted away as Sarah immersed herself in the borrowed wisdom of the scriptures. She didn't understand everything, but certain phrases struck her with the force of revelation. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That one hit particularly hard. Her entire life had been about her own understanding, her own strategies, her own control. And look where it had led her. The humility of accepting that she didn't have all the answers, that perhaps she had been looking in all the wrong places, was a bitter pill to swallow, yet surprisingly freeing. It was an admission of defeat, yes, but also a surrender to a potentially greater power. As the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows, Sarah felt a growing hunger that was more profound than just physical. It was a hunger for meaning, for purpose, for something that wouldn't crumble the way her material world had. The stories within the Bible of people who faced impossible odds and found strength through faith began to paint a picture of resilience she desperately needed to internalize. She saw echoes of her own pain in their struggles, but also glimpses of their triumphs, born not from their own might, but from a divine intervention they trusted in. It wasn't magic, it was something far deeper, a transformation of the spirit. The park was now bustling with lunch crowds, and Sarah felt the gaze of passers-by, a mix of pity and indifference. Shame threatened to creep back in, but she clutched the Bible tighter, finding a strange courage in its pages. This book, once an afterthought, was becoming her anchor. It wasn't a quick fix, nor a guarantee of immediate prosperity, but it was a promise of something far more enduring: inner peace, strength in adversity, and a connection to something eternal. She knew she couldn't stay on this bench indefinitely, lost in scripture. The real world still called, demanding action, demanding survival. But now, she felt a subtle shift in her approach to that world. Instead of panic, there was a nascent sense of trust. Instead of despair, a flicker of hope. She needed to move, to find a place to sleep for the night. But this time, she wouldn't walk alone. She carried not just the weight of her losses, but the unexpected lightness of a newfound spiritual companion. The next steps would be difficult, but for the first time, she felt a whisper of guidance, a sense that she was not entirely lost, but merely redirected onto a different, unfamiliar path. The cold, hard bench was a cruel mirror to the emptiness in Alara's soul. Her once vibrant life, a meticulously built mosaic of career triumphs, a loving home, and a supportive community, had shattered into irreparable fragments. The bankruptcy papers, the divorce decree, the eviction notice, each document Sarah stood on the precipice of a life she no longer recognized. The stranger's words, "When you lose everything, look up," echoed in the hollow space where her dreams once resided. She looked up, not at the sky, but at the peeling paint of the motel ceiling, the only shelter she could afford with the last scraps of her savings. The grandeur of her former life, the thriving business, the sprawling home, the illusion of control, all had vanished like smoke. Each day was a battle against the crushing weight of despair, a raw wound refusing to heal. She felt stripped bare, not just of material possessions, but of her very identity. Who was Sarah without her empire? Who was she without the accolades, the busy schedule, the constant demands that had defined her for decades? The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the old air conditioner. It was a silence she had once craved, but now dreaded, for it left her alone with her thoughts, a relentless torrent of what-ifs and if-onlys. Sleep offered little respite, plagued by nightmares of balance sheets turning red and doors slamming shut. She found herself clutching the small, worn Bible her grandmother had given her years ago, a relic she had long neglected, its pages crisp and unread. It was a tangible link to a past where faith was a comforting certainty, not a desperate plea. She remembered her grandmother's unwavering belief, even through her own trials. Sarah wondered if that kind of faith was even possible anymore, for someone as broken as her. Yet, a tiny flicker, almost imperceptible, stirred within her chest. It wasn't hope yet, but a memory of what hope felt like, a ghost of courage whispering in the dark. It was the faintest stirring of an instinct to look beyond the immediate despair, to seek something more profound than what had just crumbled. The motel room became a cocoon of forced introspection. Sarah spent days sifting through old photos, not of her business triumphs, but of family gatherings, simpler times, moments when joy was uncomplicated and success wasn't measured in digits. She saw her younger self, full of an innocent spark, untouched by the relentless pursuit of more. The realization hit her with surprising force. She had lost herself long before she lost her fortune. The pursuit of external validation had slowly, insidiously, eroded her inner peace, replacing genuine connection with superficial achievements. This wasn't just a financial collapse, it was a soul collapse. The stranger's words began to take on a deeper meaning. Look Up wasn't merely about finding external help, but about rediscovering an internal compass, one that pointed towards something beyond the material. She started small, a walk in a nearby park, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the sun on her face. Simple acts she had deemed trivial during her frantic race to the top. The beauty of a single blooming flower, the laughter of children playing, the quiet rustle of leaves. These small miracles began to penetrate the thick fog of her grief. She noticed the details she had previously overlooked, the intricate patterns of life continuing, oblivious to her personal tragedy. A sense of profound loneliness still clung to her, but it was now laced with a curious detachment, an observer's perspective on her own unraveling. Each small observation was a tiny thread, gradually weaving into a new understanding of what truly mattered. The detachment grew, slowly transforming from a shield against pain into a lens for clarity. Sarah started reading the old Bible, tentatively at first, as if approaching a fragile artifact. The words felt foreign, yet strangely comforting. Passages about resilience, about faith in times of famine, about finding strength when all hope seemed lost, resonated with an uncanny accuracy. It wasn't immediate salvation, but a gradual unfolding of a different perspective. She realized that her past self, consumed by ambition, would have scoffed at such simplistic wisdom, dismissing it as naive or irrelevant. But now, stripped of all pretenses, her heart was open, raw and vulnerable, ready to absorb truths it had previously rejected. One evening, while watching the sunset from the motel window, she found herself praying for the first time in years. It wasn't a formal, structured prayer, but a raw, honest outpouring of her fear, her shame, her utter helplessness. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow alone, but of release. It was an acknowledgement that she couldn't fix this on her own, that her own strength had failed her. This surrender, far from feeling like another defeat, brought a strange sense of peace. It was as if she had finally let go of a heavy burden she had been unknowingly carrying for too long. The act of reaching out, even into the void, felt like a lifeline. This newfound act of prayer, however tentative, marked a pivotal shift. It wasn't about asking for her old life back, but about asking for guidance, for strength to face whatever lay ahead. Sarah felt a faint stir of courage, a tiny ember in the ashes of her defeat. It was the courage to simply exist, to face another day, to believe that there might be a purpose beyond her immediate pain. She started volunteering at a local soup kitchen, not out of altruism initially, but out of a desperate need for human connection, for a distraction from her own consuming thoughts. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who once commanded boardrooms, was now serving meals to those who had even less than she did. But in the simple act of ladling soup, of making eye contact with another human being, she found a surprising sense of humility and connection. Their struggles, though different, mirrored her own in their raw humanity. There was no pretense, no judgment, just shared vulnerability. One elderly woman, with eyes that held a lifetime of stories, smiled at Sarah and thanked her with such genuine gratitude that it pierced through Sarah's hardened shell. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, yet it felt profoundly real, a stark contrast to the transactional relationships that had defined her former life. It was a reminder that even when you feel utterly empty, you still have something to give, and in giving, you begin to receive. The gratitude from the elderly woman lingered, a warmth that gently pushed back against the cold grip of self-pity. Sarah found herself looking forward to her shifts at the soup kitchen, finding purpose in the most unexpected of places. It was a challenging environment, filled with stories of hardship and resilience, but it was also a place where compassion thrived. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing the quiet dignity of people who had lost so much, yet continued to face each day with a quiet strength. Their struggles made her own feel less isolated, less unique. She wasn't alone in her pain. She was part of a larger human tapestry of suffering and survival. This exposure to raw human experience began to chip away at her self-absorption. Her previous life had been a constant competition, a race to outperform, to outshine. Now she was simply present, helping, connecting. She saw individuals, not just numbers or stereotypes. She realized how insulated her life had been, how detached she had become from the realities faced by the majority. This was a brutal but necessary awakening. It was in these unassuming encounters that Sarah began to rebuild, not her empire, but her character. Each interaction was a lesson, slowly teaching her the true meaning of empathy and service, laying the groundwork for a new understanding of what it meant to be truly wealthy. One afternoon, after a particularly busy shift at the soup kitchen, Sarah sat on a park bench, reflecting. The sun was warm, the sky a brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the inner storm that had raged for months. She felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from honest work and genuine contribution. Her hands, once accustomed to signing contracts and typing on keyboards, were now rough from washing dishes and handling food. She looked at them, not with disdain for their changed appearance, but with a quiet sense of pride. These hands were doing something real, something that mattered in a direct, tangible way. A new thought began to form, tentative but persistent. Perhaps losing everything wasn't just a punishment, but an opportunity. An opportunity to strip away the superfluous, to redefine her values, to connect with a deeper truth. The stranger's words, "When you lose everything, look up," returned, now imbued with a richer context. Looking up wasn't just about faith in a higher power, but about looking beyond her immediate circumstances, beyond her own ego, to the interconnectedness of humanity and the resilience of the human spirit. She was beginning to see that the closed doors of her past were indeed clearing the way for something different, something she couldn't yet fully grasp but felt a growing pull towards. The subtle shift from resentment to curiosity marked a turning point. Sarah started seeking out more than just physical engagement. She craved spiritual nourishment. She began attending a small, unassuming church near the motel, drawn by the sound of hymns she dimly remembered from her childhood. The first few times, she sat in the back, an anonymous figure observing, half expecting judgment or pity. Instead, she found a welcoming community, simple in their faith, profound in their kindness. No one knew her past, her failures, her former status. She was just Sarah, a quiet woman seeking solace. The sermon spoke of forgiveness, redemption, and the unwavering love of God, even in the darkest valleys. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. They were vital lifelines. She listened, not with skepticism, but with an open heart, her spiritual thirst undeniable. The pastor, a gentle woman with kind eyes, spoke of God closing doors to open greater paths, and Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. This was the very core of the message she was unconsciously seeking. Each sermon, each hymn, each shared moment of fellowship chipped away at the layers of cynicism and self-doubt, replacing them with a fragile but growing sense of hope. The path was still unclear, but she no longer felt utterly lost. Engaging with the church community provided not just spiritual guidance, but also practical support. A woman from the congregation, hearing Sarah mention her struggle to find affordable housing, offered a spare room in her modest home. It was an act of pure, unadulterated kindness, offered without expectation or judgment. Sarah, who had always prided herself on her independence, found it incredibly difficult to accept charity. Her pride, a remnant of her old self, warred with her desperate need. It was a genuine conflict, a battle between what she thought she should be and what she truly needed. She spent a sleepless night wrestling with her ego, the voice of her former successful self whispering about weakness and dependence. But the memory of the stranger's words, "Look up," and the pastor's message of humility finally prevailed. She realized that accepting help was not a sign of weakness, but an act of trust, a willingness to be vulnerable and to believe in the goodness of others, and perhaps in God's provision. The next morning, with a lump in her throat, she accepted the offer. Moving into a small, spare room, she carried only a single suitcase and her grandmother's Bible, leaving behind the sterile anonymity of the motel for the warmth of a stranger's home. A true leap of faith. Living with Mrs. Elena, the kind woman from the church, was a revelation. Elena's home was small, but filled with a profound sense of peace and warmth. There was always a pot of tea brewing, the scent of fresh bread, and the quiet rhythm of daily prayer. Sarah watched Elena go about her days, tending to her garden, helping neighbors, always with a gentle smile and an unwavering trust in God. Elena didn't preach, she simply lived her faith, demonstrating its power through her everyday actions. Sarah learned more from observing Elena than from any sermon. She saw humility in action, generosity without expectation, and a joy that stemmed not from possessions, but from an inner wellspring of peace. The contrast with her former life couldn't have been starker. Sarah had once chased grand visions. Elena found beauty and purpose in the mundane. Sarah had sought control. Elena embraced surrender. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Elena's quiet strength began to chip away at Sarah's deeply ingrained habits of striving and worrying. Sarah started helping Elena in the stranger's words echoed, a quiet tremor in the vast emptiness I felt. When you lose everything, look up. It wasn't a command, but an invitation, whispered into a void I thought nothing could fill. I had been looking down for so long at the shattered pieces of my life, at the dust of what once was. My business, my marriage, my sense of self, all had crumbled, leaving me adrift. That night, under a sky unusually clear, I did look up. Not in prayer, not in faith, but in a desperate, almost involuntary surrender to the immensity above. The stars, ancient and indifferent, seemed to mock my small sorrow, yet there was a strange comfort in their distance, a reminder that my world, however broken, was but a speck. It was the first time in months I felt something other than despair, a fragile curiosity replacing the crushing weight. This moment, this simple act of looking up, was the faintest spark in the darkest night. It didn't solve my problems, but it shifted my perspective, just enough for a sliver of light to penetrate. The idea that there might be something beyond my immediate suffering, something greater at play, began to take root. It was an intellectual notion, not yet a spiritual conviction, but it was a start. The stranger, with his kind eyes and gentle voice, had offered a key, and I had, perhaps subconsciously, begun to turn it. This wasn't the end of my struggles. It was merely the opening line of a new, terrifying, yet strangely compelling chapter. The real challenge would be to sustain that gaze upward, especially when the world below insisted on pulling me back down. How would I translate this fleeting moment of clarity into enduring strength? The next morning, the promise of dawn felt heavier than usual. My eyes, still gritty from a sleepless night, searched the sky, but found no immediate answers. The stranger's advice, though profound in the moment, now felt distant, almost poetic in its simplicity. My reality was concrete: an eviction notice, a dwindling bank account, the hollow ache of loneliness. How could looking up fix any of that? I felt a familiar cynicism creeping back, threatening to extinguish the tiny flame of hope that had flickered. I walked the familiar streets, the same streets that once buzzed with my ambition, now seemed to murmur with my failure. Every storefront, every passing face felt like a mirror reflecting my brokenness. The urge to retreat, to pull the covers over my head and disappear, was overwhelming. Yet, a subtle shift had occurred. When I saw my reflection in a shop window, instead of the usual self-pity, I recalled the stranger's words. It wasn't about magic, it was about perspective. What if looking up wasn't about expecting a miracle, but about changing my internal landscape? What if it was about shifting my focus from what I had lost to what I still had, or what I could still gain? The thought was radical, almost revolutionary, given my recent state. It wasn't about erasing the pain, but about finding a different lens through which to view it. I didn't feel a sudden surge of faith, but rather a quiet, insistent nudge towards introspection. The idea of a divine hand wasn't yet present, but the thought of a broader universe, a bigger picture, was. That day marked a subtle but significant turning point. Instead of spiraling further into despair, I found myself observing my surroundings with a newfound, almost detached awareness. The homeless man on the corner, who I usually hurried past, caught my eye. He wasn't asking for money, just sitting, watching the pigeons. There was a quiet dignity about him that I had never noticed before. For a brief moment, my own troubles seemed to recede, replaced by a fleeting sense of connection to a shared human experience of struggle and resilience. It wasn't profound empathy yet, but it was a crack in the wall of my self-absorption. This small observation, this break in my pattern of thought, felt like a direct result of the stranger's challenge to look up. Later, while sorting through boxes of old belongings, a painful task that unearthed countless memories of better times, I stumbled upon an old, worn Bible. It was my grandmother's, a relic I hadn't touched in years, perhaps decades. I had always admired her unwavering faith, but it had never been my own. Now, holding the delicate pages, a strange sensation washed over me. It wasn't a sudden conversion, but a sense of something forgotten, something fundamental. I didn't open it immediately, but its presence felt like an anchor in the storm, a tangible link to a different kind of strength, one that had sustained generations before me. The thought lingered. Could this ancient book hold keys to the up the stranger spoke of? The Bible lay on my bedside table for days, an unspoken challenge. Each time I saw it, the memory of my grandmother's gentle spirit, her quiet resilience, came flooding back. She was a woman who had faced immense hardship, but always with a steadfast peace. A peace I now desperately craved. I felt a growing curiosity, a yearning not just for answers, but for that same sense of inner calm. One evening, unable to sleep, overwhelmed by the silence of my empty apartment, I finally picked it up. My fingers traced the faded cover, then hesitantly, I opened it. I didn't know where to start, so I simply let it fall open to a random page. My eyes landed on a verse from Psalms. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. The words resonated deep within me, striking a chord I hadn't known existed. It was as if the stranger's advice had found its echo in this ancient text. Look up, indeed. But this verse offered a specific direction: to the Lord. This wasn't just about cosmic awareness, it was about a divine source of help. It was a terrifying thought for someone who had always prided himself on self-reliance, on forging his own path. But my path had led to ruin. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a different way. This wasn't a eureka moment of faith, but a powerful intellectual opening, a crack in the dam of my atheism and self-sufficiency. The idea of surrendering, of trusting in a higher power, was both frightening and alluring in its promise of relief. That initial encounter with the scripture became a quiet daily ritual. I didn't dive into complex theology or attend church immediately. Instead, I simply read, often just a few verses, allowing the words to slowly seep into the barren landscape of my mind. It was a process of observation, of internal dialogue, questioning every assumption I had about faith, about suffering, about control. The narratives of biblical figures, their triumphs and their profound failures, their unwavering faith in the face of unimaginable adversity, began to offer a different lens through which to view my own predicament. I saw echoes of my own despair in their stories, but also, crucially, the path to their eventual hope and deliverance. The idea of losing everything began to take on a new dimension. It wasn't just a punitive event, it was a potential stripping away of all that was superficial, all that I had mistakenly identified as my worth. My identity had been tied to my success, my achievements, my material possessions. Now, with those gone, I was forced to confront the core of who I was, or who I could be. The scriptures, particularly the passages on resilience and trust, began to subtly reshape my internal narrative. It wasn't about getting my old life back. It was about building a new one, perhaps on a foundation far more enduring than anything I had constructed before. The thought was still tentative, but it was there, a persistent whisper against the roar of my anxieties. As I delved deeper into the sacred texts, I began to notice subtle changes in my outlook. The pervasive gloom that had enveloped me for months started to lift, not entirely, but enough to let in glimmers of light. I found myself paying more attention to the small kindnesses around me. The neighbor who offered a cup of coffee, the cashier who smiled genuinely, the unexpected beauty of a sunset. These were things I had been blind to, lost in my own self-pity. The act of reading, of actively seeking wisdom beyond my own limited understanding, was slowly recalibrating my perception. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a gradual unfolding, like a flower turning towards the sun after a long winter. This shift wasn't without its internal battles. Moments of doubt were frequent, sometimes overwhelming. Is this just a crutch? I would ask myself. Am I just grasping at straws because I have nothing else? The rational, skeptical part of my mind fought against this nascent spiritual awakening. But then I would remember the profound emptiness I had felt before, the utter desolation. This new path, however uncertain, however challenging, offered something else, a sense of purpose, a connection to something larger, and a fragile, burgeoning hope. The fear of being wrong, of being foolish, was still present, but the fear of remaining lost, of never finding my way back, was far greater. The choice, increasingly, felt less like a leap of faith and more like a necessary step toward survival. My financial situation, meanwhile, remained dire. The reality of needing to find work, any work, pressed heavily upon me. My previous career had been in a specialized field, and finding something similar now, without the network and resources I once commanded, seemed impossible. The world of minimum wage jobs, which I had never considered, felt daunting and humbling. The pride I once held, the self-importance that came with my former status, had to be shed, piece by painful piece. This was another form of losing everything, the loss of identity tied to profession. It was a bitter pill to swallow, forcing me to confront deeply ingrained assumptions about success and personal value. One afternoon, I saw a flyer for a local community center looking for volunteers. They needed help with organizing donations and assisting with their soup kitchen. My first instinct was to dismiss it. I needed income, not volunteer hours. But something, perhaps the quiet prompting from my recent readings, urged me to consider it. It was a chance to serve, to look beyond my own needs, even for a few hours. The idea was intimidating. I had always been on the receiving end of such services, never the giver. But the thought persisted, a small voice suggesting that perhaps giving, even when I felt I had nothing to give, was a part of looking up in a different, more active sense. It was a challenge to my ego, a test of whether I could truly embrace humility. Walking into the community center felt like stepping into a different world. The air was thick with the scent of simmering soup and the low murmur of conversations. It was bustling, chaotic, yet filled with an undeniable warmth. I felt awkward, out of place, my hands, accustomed to keyboards and business papers, fumbling with bags of donated clothes. But the people there, both volunteers and those seeking help, met me with an openness I hadn't encountered in months. There was no judgment, only shared humanity. For the first time since my collapse, I felt useful, engaged in something bigger than my own problems. It was a profoundly humbling experience. stripping away the last vestiges of my former self-importance. As I helped serve meals, listening to snippets of conversation, I heard stories of hardship that dwarfed my own. People who had lost far more, suffered far longer, yet who still managed to share a laugh, a kind word. Their resilience was a stark contrast to my earlier self-pity. It was a living embodiment of looking up, not just individually, but as a community. The joy I felt in helping, even in small ways, was unexpected and deeply nourishing. It wasn't about money, or status, or even personal gain. It was about connection, about belonging, about the simple act of being present and useful. This was a different kind of wealth, one that filled a spiritual void I hadn't realized was so profound. The fear of being judged, of being seen as a failure, slowly dissipated in the face of genuine human connection. The volunteering quickly became more than just a distraction. It became an anchor. Every day I spent at the community center, I felt a little more whole, a little more aligned with the person I wanted to be. The raw vulnerability of those I served and the unwavering dedication of the other volunteers chipped away at my cynicism. I started to understand the true meaning of compassion, not as an abstract concept, but as a tangible force that binds us together. It was here, amidst the mundane tasks of sorting donations and scrubbing pots, that I started to truly grasp the message of selfless service that resonated through the scriptures I was reading. My focus shifted from what I was missing to what I could contribute, however small. One elderly woman, a regular at the soup kitchen, noticed my quiet intensity. She shared stories of her own life, of overcoming war and famine, always concluding with a simple affirmation of her faith. "God provides," she would say, her eyes twinkling. "Sometimes not how you expect, but always when you need it." Her words, delivered without fanfare, resonated with the stranger's original advice. It wasn't about a grandiose rescue, but about sustenance, about finding strength in unexpected places, and about trusting in a process beyond my control. These small, daily interactions began to knit together the fragments of my shattered belief system, creating a new tapestry woven with threads of humility, gratitude, and a budding sense of trust. The sense of community I found at the center extended beyond its walls. I began to connect with other volunteers, forming bonds of friendship based not on shared professional success, but on shared purpose and mutual support. These new relationships, forged in humility, felt more genuine, more substantial than many of the superficial connections I had cultivated in my former life. We talked about our struggles, our hopes, our fledgling attempts to make sense of a chaotic world. It was a space where authenticity was valued, where vulnerability was seen as strength, not weakness. This was a profound healing experience, countering the isolation and loneliness that had defined my life for so long. Through these conversations, I discovered that many of my new friends shared a deep faith. They spoke of God not as a distant, abstract entity, but as a constant presence in their lives, a source of comfort and guidance. Their testimonies, delivered with quiet conviction, were far more persuasive than any sermon. They lived their faith, embodying the principles of compassion, forgiveness, and hope. I began to attend their small, informal prayer meetings, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to understand, to experience what they experienced. It was a gradual immersion, a gentle invitation into a world I had once dismissed, but which now felt increasingly like home. The walls of my skepticism were slowly but surely crumbling. It was during one of these prayer meetings, held in a small, unassuming church hall, that I experienced a moment of profound clarity. The room was filled with soft murmurs, heartfelt petitions, and the quiet presence of people seeking solace and strength. As they sang a simple hymn, words of gratitude and surrender, I felt an inexplicable warmth spread through me. It wasn't a hallucination, nor a sudden voice from above. It was an internal shift, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and resistance that had resided in my chest for years. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who had become friends, I understood. The looking up wasn't just about an external act. It was an internal posture, a turning of the heart towards something higher, something sacred. Tears, hot and unexpected, streamed down my face. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of release, of acceptance, of a profound and overwhelming sense of peace. It was as if a heavy burden I hadn't realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. This wasn't just hope. It was faith, a nascent, trembling faith, but unmistakably present. The promise that a door would open by dawn, that a way would be made, suddenly felt not like a stranger's comforting platitude, but like an eternal truth. In that sacred space, I understood that my loss wasn't the end, but the necessary stripping away, the emptying out, that created space for something new, something infinitely more valuable. My spiritual rebirth had begun. With this newfound, if still fragile faith, I began to view my circumstances not as punishments, but as catalysts. The loss of my business, my marriage, my financial security, all these devastating blows now seemed like the harsh winds that clear away old debris, making way for new growth. It was a painful truth, but an empowering one. I started to actively seek out opportunities, not just for survival, but for purpose. My time at the community center had opened my eyes to the real needs of people, needs that my previous, self-focused life had completely ignored. I began to see that my past skills, however specialized, could be repurposed, adapted to serve in ways I had never imagined. The process of rebuilding was slow, requiring immense patience and perseverance. There were days when doubt still crept in, whispering insidious questions about the future. But now, when those doubts arose, I had a new recourse: prayer. I learned to talk to God, not just as an abstract concept, but as a trusted confidant, a source of wisdom and strength. It was a humble, often awkward conversation, but it provided a solace and clarity that no amount of self-analysis had ever offered. This connection, this conscious choice to look up and pray, became the bedrock of my resilience, transforming moments of weakness into opportunities for deeper trust. I was no longer alone in my struggles. Then, an unexpected opportunity arose. A small local nonprofit dedicated to helping struggling small businesses develop sustainable practices put out a call for project managers. My initial reaction was apprehension. My own business had failed, after all. Who was I to advise others? But a quiet voice, now distinctly different from my former ego, urged me to apply. It wasn't about my past failures. It was about applying the lessons learned, about offering experience that, however painful, was now valuable. I remembered the words, "God closes doors to open greater paths." Could this be one of those paths, unexpected and yet perfectly aligned? I applied, detailing not just my professional experience, but also my journey of loss and recovery, emphasizing the profound lessons in humility and service I had learned. To my surprise, I received an interview. The director of the nonprofit, a woman with a kind but discerning gaze, listened intently to my story. She told me that while my resume was impressive, it was my honesty about my journey, my vulnerability, and newfound purpose that truly set me apart. She saw not a failed businessman, but a man who understood resilience, who could empathize with the struggles of others, and who possessed a deep well of empathy. This was a door opening, not in the way I would have planned, but in a way that truly fit the new person I had become. The interview was a pivotal moment. It wasn't just a job discussion, it was a conversation about purpose, about the redemptive power of loss. I spoke openly about the despair, the stranger's words, the old Bible, and the transformative experience at the community center. It felt liberating to share my truth, not as a confession of failure, but as a testament to growth. The director understood. She too had faced her own share of setbacks and found strength in faith. She saw in me not a broken man, but one who had been refined by fire, ready to use his talents for a greater good. The role wasn't just about managing projects. It was about mentoring, about inspiring, about rebuilding. It was everything my old career wasn't, and everything my new self craved. By dawn, the door I needed opened. Not a literal door, but a pathway, clear and compelling. I was offered the position, a role that perfectly married my professional skills with my spiritual awakening. It was a chance to use my expertise to help others avoid the pitfalls I had fallen into, to guide them not just financially, but holistically. The salary was modest compared to my previous earnings, but the richness of the work, the satisfaction of making a tangible difference, was immeasurable. It was a profound vindication of the stranger's words, a living testament to the message that loss, however devastating, is often the precursor to something far more meaningful. My journey of Recommeco Espiritual had found its vocational expression. My work at the nonprofit quickly became a source of deep fulfillment. I found immense satisfaction in helping small business owners navigate their challenges, offering not just practical advice, but also a listening ear and a story of hope. Many of them were at their own breaking points, facing the same despair I had known. I could speak to them from a place of genuine understanding, sharing not just strategies, but also the crucial importance of resilience, of looking beyond immediate circumstances, and of trusting in a process larger than themselves. I found myself sharing my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as an inspirational one, illustrating how even the deepest valleys can lead to the highest peaks of personal growth. The message, "God closes doors to open greater paths," became a constant refrain in my mentorship. I saw it play out in the lives of the entrepreneurs I worked with. A failed product launch leading to a pivot that unlocked a much larger market. A partnership dissolution forcing a re-evaluation of business values that led to a more ethical and sustainable model. These weren't mere coincidences. They were patterns of divine intervention, subtle nudges guiding individuals toward their true potential, often hidden behind the facade of initial defeat. My own story, once a source of shame, had become a beacon of hope for others, a living testament to the power of spiritual rebirth. Life began to rebuild itself, not into the exact replica of what was lost, but into something richer, more authentic, and deeply anchored in purpose. My relationships, too, found new ground. The friendships forged at the community center deepened, becoming a constant source of support and spiritual growth. I reconnected with some distant family members, sharing my journey and finding renewed closeness built on honesty and shared values, rather than superficial expectations. The loneliness that had plagued me for so long dissipated, replaced by a sense of belonging, a profound gratitude for the community I had found. My faith continued to grow, transforming from a tentative acceptance into a vibrant, active force in my daily life. Prayer became a source of strength, reflection, a habit, and service an intrinsic part of my identity. I no longer feared what tomorrow might bring, because I had learned that even in loss, there was a hidden grace, a deeper plan. The past, with all its pain and mistakes, was no longer a burden, but a valuable teacher, refining my spirit and shaping me into a person capable of true empathy and unwavering hope. The man who had lost everything was gone, replaced by someone who had found what truly mattered. The transformation was not just external, but profoundly internal. The frantic pursuit of success, the constant striving for more, had been replaced by a quiet contentment, a deep gratitude for the simple blessings of life. I learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or material possessions, but in the richness of relationships, the depth of purpose, and the unwavering peace that comes from a life lived in alignment with a higher calling. My perspective on suffering had also shifted. I now understood that adversity, while painful, was often the crucible in which character is forged, where true faith is tested and strengthened. The stranger's simple advice, "When you lose everything, look up," had not just been a command, but a prophecy. It had guided me through the darkest night of my soul, leading me not to a return of my old life, but to the dawn of a completely new one. A life infused with meaning, service, and an unshakable belief in divine providence. The door that opened was not just a job opportunity. It was a doorway to a renewed spirit, a deeper understanding of grace, and an enduring sense of hope that transcended all circumstances. I had found my way back, not by looking for what was lost, but by looking up to what was always there. My journey, from utter defeat to profound spiritual rebirth, stands as a testament to a timeless truth. Sometimes, the greatest blessings are disguised as unbearable losses. My entire world had to crumble for me to realize that its foundation was flawed, built on sand. It was only when I had nothing left to hold on to that I finally looked up, finding not just solace, but a completely new direction, a purpose far grander than any I had conceived on my own. The stranger's simple words, echoing in my despair, planted the first seed of hope. The dawn that followed revealed a path I never would have chosen, yet was precisely the one I needed. My experience profoundly underscores the message: God closes doors to open greater paths. These closures are not denials, but redirections, gentle nudges, or sometimes powerful shoves, guiding us toward what truly serves our highest good and deepest purpose. It's a journey of surrendering control, of trusting in a wisdom far beyond our own, and of embracing the often painful process of transformation. When everything falls apart, it's not the end. It's the opportunity to build something more resilient, more meaningful, and more aligned with the divine plan for your life. Look up, always. For it is in those moments of vulnerability, when you surrender your burdens to a higher power, that the most incredible doors begin to open, leading you to a life of profound peace and purpose. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a flicker of hope or courage in your heart, please consider sharing it. Your likes and comments help spread this message of resilience and faith to others who might be feeling lost. And if you're searching for more stories of spiritual awakening and renewal, subscribe to our channel to join our growing community. We are all on this journey together. The morning light filtered through the small window, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floor of my new modest apartment. It wasn't the penthouse I once called home, nor the sprawling estate where I raised my children, but it held a warmth, a quiet dignity that resonated deep within my soul. The aroma of brewing coffee filled the air, a simple pleasure I now cherished more than any gourmet meal. This peace, this profound sense of belonging to something greater, had bloomed from the ashes of everything I thought I was. The door that opened at dawn wasn't a return to my old life, but an entrance to a new one, richer and more purposeful than I could have ever imagined. The stranger's words echoed in my memory. When you lose everything, look up. They had seemed so simple, almost cliché in my moment of despair. Yet looking up became more than an act. It was a reorientation of my entire being. It was the moment I stopped searching for external solutions and turned inward, and then upward, connecting with a faith that had always been a quiet presence, but never a foundational rock. That rock now held me firm. The community I found in my volunteer work, the genuine connections, the laughter and shared tears. These were the riches I'd unknowingly been seeking all along. God hadn't just closed a door. He had dismantled the entire structure, clearing the ground for something truly divine to be built. My journey taught me that true wealth isn't measured in possessions, but in purpose, peace, and an unwavering trust in a plan far grander than our own. It's in the quiet strength discovered in vulnerability, the unexpected joy found in simplicity, and the profound love that emerges when all else is stripped away. If my story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt lost or at a crossroads, remember that even in the deepest shadows, there is light. And sometimes, losing everything is the universe's way, or rather God's way, of making space for your greatest blessing. To share your own journey and connect with a community that understands, please comment below and let us know how your faith has guided you through difficult times. Your story might be the light someone else needs to see.